Greetings. Can people hear me in the back? Yeah, obviously. Okay, welcome to the 16th annual Solanki lecture. Very happy to see such a nice big crowd. We actually had to find some extra chairs. That's a good thing. Sorry about the plates. Some of us think we're doubling the plates up. The caterers out there running around now trying to find more plates, but too late. But I like to see how people were innovative in using cups as a way to eat that good Indian food. So I also would like to thank everybody for being here. I know it's LA and it's raining, and there's this whole narrative in LA. Of course, if it rains, you can't drive. Or even if it looks like it's going to rain, you can't drive. So I'm really happy that everybody showed up. Amitav is here from DC, and he's saying, oh, how wonderful the weather is. Wait till tomorrow when you're trying to fly out of here. I don't think it's going to be so wonderful. I'm also happy to see we have a really interesting constituency of different folks here. We have people from the local community, and I welcome you. We have college faculty here, college students, and we also have some high school AP World History kids here as well, right? Yeah. I didn't tell you who I am. I'm Tim Kern. I direct the Yadnana Center for India Studies, and I'm also the chief reader for AP World History. And this talk is going to be on the exam. Actually, I don't remember what's going to be on the exam, but something like it. Okay. The center, we've been very busy this year. I'd just like to kind of talk a little bit about what the kind of events we've had. We had an event in the fall from Joy Chatterjee, a talk about literature, about Tagore, and his sort of connections with Tolstoy, which was a really interesting talk. We had Arnab Banerjee here, who talked about colonial Indian theater in colonial Bengal. We also had a talk recently on Indian tech workers in the diaspora from Sarita Amruti, who's an anthropologist at the University of Washington. Forthcoming, later in April, we're going to have a talk on the sort of sexual politics in contemporary India. That'll be on April 17th, I believe. And then lastly, we'll have a talk by Ross Dunn about Ibn Battuta in India, back to kind of a historical subject. So we've had a full sort of spectrum of events this year, and I'm kind of happy that we've hit different disciplinary sort of perspectives. Like tonight, Professor Acharya will be talking to us from the lens of international relations, international studies. We've also been busy. We're still doing the Teach India workshops, where we work with history teachers to help them think about better ways to integrate India in a way that they teach and study world history in particular. Last year we had a workshop at the Shiva Vishnu Temple in Lanham, Maryland. We had one locally. Next summer we're going to have one at the Shiva Vishnu Temple again in Lanham. We're also going to have one at the Alaji Temple in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and another one locally here. So we're still doing this work with history teachers, which I think is really good. I would like to thank quite a few people here. I'd like to thank Kamal Palace for being here on time, and hopefully next year they'll bring more plates. But the food was good, was it not? Yeah, always good. Okay, I'd also like to thank some local history teachers who've been through our Teach India program. Where are you? Susan Grimm in the back, Shweta, Emma Spatharos. There's some other people as well. Thanks for helping out. I'd also like to thank the members of the advisory board that are here. I think Norbert Scher is here. Raise your hand, Norbert. Kim is here somewhere. Kim Walters. There's Kim. Is Barbara here? Barbara Grossman? No. Pravina's here. I saw Pravina somewhere. Where'd Pravina go? She was here. Okay, any event. And I'd really like to thank Dr. Mihir Pandya from the Department of Anthropology. Where's Mihir? Stand up, Mihir. So Mihir's been really helping out with the center this year, and he's done a fantastic job with our website. I highly recommend that you have a look. And it's a good place to kind of keep in touch with what we're doing. And anytime you see an event on campus that you want to come see and you need to get parking, shoot the India Studies email. And if you're a Cal State Long Beach person, you have a parking pass. You don't need a parking permit. But if you want to come to campus, we'll get your parking permit and facilitate that process. I'd also like to thank the History Department and the College of Liberal Arts for being such great supporters of events like this in the Yadnana Center. But of course, most importantly, we want to thank Buka and Nalini Solanki and their family for their generous donation. which created the whole center. So let's give Uka Nalini. So I'm going to ask Dr. David Wells, the Dean of College of Liberal Arts, to come up and say a few words, right? Thank you.
I'm going to try and keep it to a few words. I am the son of a preacher and a professor of rhetoric, naturally or by training. Well, good evening. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the California State University of Long Beach, and particularly on behalf of the College of Liberal Arts. This is a signature event for the college, and I look forward to it every year. We all need to stop for a moment and thank Tim Kern for all the work that he does for the center, and particularly for this event. So this is my 6th of the 16 lectures that I made it to, and those of you who've been here in the last 5 years who've heard me do previous versions of this welcome may remember that I have mentioned that my own education, which happened in rural western Pennsylvania, taught me almost nothing about India or about South Asia. In fact, everything that I learned about India came from going to church and listening to Christian missionaries. So you could imagine that there was a lens to that information that skewed things a bit, shall we say. So I'm tempted to point out that I've learned a lot in the last 5 years, but I'd have to say mostly what I've learned is that I have a lot more that I need to understand, and so for that reason I look forward to the lecture this evening. Also for that reason, I'm very grateful to the Solanki family for endowing the center, as Tim mentioned. It not only provides this wonderful lecture every year that brings so many people from the university, from high schools, from the community together, but also the Teach India program, which is really the heart and soul of really making an impact in terms of the number of people who are getting a much better education about India and South Asia than I got. And I'd like to stop for a moment and ask you, if you're a high school student, would you just stand up for a moment? Thank you so much. We are happy to have you here, and please apply to CSULB. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the chair of the history department, Dr. David Schaefer. Yes.
Well, I think that everything I was going to say was already said. But with that, I want to also acknowledge Tim Kern. Tim is a colleague of mine, a very close friend. We've been friends for years. But anyway,
Stop, David.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to mumble the number of years we've been friends. But it's Tim's leadership, his directorship of the Yadanandan Center, that has allowed us to do the Teach India, taking students to India every other year with Norbert Scher. The events like this, the cultural events on campus, that really expose the campus community and the larger community beyond the campus to Indian politics, Indian culture, Indian history, Indian society. But most of all, I do want to thank Uka and Nalini Solanki for their support, because it's that support that makes events like this possible. So again, as the chair of the history department, representing the history department, again, I do want to extend my deepest thanks to the Solanki family and to Tim for all that they've done. And you're going to hear yet another excellent lecture that's going to expand your horizons. So without anything else to say.
I'm sort of thinking about talking about how we met, but that's a private audience. And our haircuts there. I'll leave that as a suspense. Anyway. So it's really my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Amitav Acharya. I got to know Amitav a little bit today because we spent the day together. He actually went to the Department of International Studies today and met with students and faculty there, and we had a what was going to be sort of a casual lunch, and it ended up being sort of, Amitav, I think you agree, sort of ended up being like a graduate seminar. But it was very good, and we appreciate that you did that for an hour and a half today. Amitav comes to us from American University in DC. He's the Distinguished Professor of International Relations and the UNESCO Chair in Transnational Challenges at the School of International Service at the American University in DC. Comes to originally, he's a very global person, not just in the context of his study, but in terms of where he spent his academic career. He grew up in Orissa, or Odisha, as we know it today. He did his undergraduate degree in India, and then he did his graduate work, master's level at the JNU in South Delhi. Then did his PhD at Murdoch University in Western Australia. And then he's always been interested as a scholar of international relations with a particular emphasis on Southeast Asia. But he also was a professor at the National University of Singapore. He then moved to Toronto, where he was a professor at York University. And then he's been at the American University for 8 years, you said? 8 years in Washington, D.C. He's also he's a past president of the International Studies Association, which is a very large organization, professional organization for those teaching and interested in all aspects of international studies. Amitav is an incredibly prolific author. He's written 30 books and edited volumes, 200 articles. He's a tweeter, and I suspect he wants you to follow him. I suspect you're also a blogger. Are you a blogger?
Yes.
Yeah, I figured. Okay, a blogger as well. And all of his works are, as somebody who teaches world history and global history and colonial India, all of his works really focus on surfacing and raising the agency of Asia when thinking about the global order and international relations, and kind of contesting the sort of notion that international relations or all these things are sort of Western-centric or of Western origin. So all his work has a kind of a theme through that about looking at Asian agency, and I think his talk tonight personifies that. His more recent books include Constructing the Global Order, which is coming out in 2 days. We tried to get copies from Cambridge University Press, but they said the publication date is Friday, so be it. But I'm sure it's an excellent book. I think probably most famous book is The End of American World Order, which has been through numerous reprintings, and there's a brand new edition out that came out with Polity Press. Also this week, week seems to be sort of karmic in this regard. And again, they would not allow us to bring the new edition until it comes out on Friday. So there's a flyer out there if you're interested, shameless plug, where you can buy that book with a 30% discount. And then the other book that he's recently written and published, and which is the basis of his talk tonight, is a book called East of India, South of China, right? Which is looking at the Bandung conference and how it sort of reshaped international politics in the context of Asia. And tonight his lecture is drawn from that book. And again, we have a flyer out there as well where you can get a discount on that if you want to purchase it online. In any event, the title of his talk is Bending Like Bandung, and many of us have noted what a catchy title that is. Bending Like Bandung, India, China, and the Reshaping of Asian and International Order. Welcome, please, Amitav Acharya.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will take a couple of seconds to mic myself. So. Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you, Dean Watts, and thank you, Cal State University, for bringing me here. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is my first visit to Long Beach, or Seal Beach, where I spent the whole afternoon yesterday walking on the beach and having a few cocktails. And tweeting about it too. So let me start by thanking the Solanki family and Mr. and Mrs. Solanki for endowing this lecture, but also the center. And you know, if you have been in the United States, there aren't that many centers specializing on India or South Asia in the United States. Nothing like China or Japan or Korea, because For Korea, there's a Korea Foundation. For Japan, there's a Japan Foundation. And China, everybody wants to fund China. I actually teach in Beijing in a college funded by one of the richest people on earth, Stephen Schwarzman. But India and South Asia doesn't get that. There's no India Foundation, and there's no South Asian Foundation. So it is people like individuals, like Mr. Solanki, that actually fill the gap. And it's an incredible initiative to have a center and a lecture. And I cannot think of another endowed lecture on India anywhere in the United States. So I'm very privileged to be one of the speakers in the series. This is the 16th. And thank you again, Mr. Solanki, for your very far-sighted initiative and contribution to understanding of India, but also contribution to education in the general. Now, again, give me a second to turn that on, okay? This lecture is very unusual for me. I don't usually give public lectures with this kind of an audience, this large audience, with a lot of PowerPoint. So I'm kind of breaking a long-standing rule because I usually would speak to you. But this is something, a topic that is steeped in history, steeped in symbolism, and also it is, I guess, 90% of the people here, especially the young people, were not born during when the conference was held. I wasn't born either, so I give you my age. I was born after 55. So it is important to have some photos and slides and documents, snippets and documents, to make this topic come alive and replay that history. So this is going to be a little heavy on audio, visuals especially, so I beg your indulgence. This is a topic which is very dear to my heart. There's no other topic that excites me more than Bandung. And I started doing research on this in 2004, and I was based in Singapore, and I specialize in Indonesia. That was one of my countries of my specialty, all of Southeast Asia, but Indonesia in particular. So I got to know some of the players who are present at the Bandung conference, including the Secretary General of the conference, who died actually the year after I videotaped an interview with him for about an hour. And I was very privileged to have access to his files. And then I supplemented that by going around the world to all the archives, the British archives, the American archives, National Archives in Washington, and Australia, and India, which is the most challenging of all the archives, because somehow they think information researchers are there to steal information, not make use of it. So it was like, and most important, the Chinese Foreign Ministry archives, which were opened very briefly for a few years, and then closed. And during that time when it was open, through my contacts in China, including some former students, we managed to get a lot of information, a lot of files, and get them translated, which cost a small fortune. And I couldn't afford to all of that, so I gave half of those documents to the Wilson Center Cold War History Project, which is now, those files are under my name, but there are some things which I kept to myself until I actually make sense of them. There are a lot of myths, misconceptions of Bandung, and unless you really carefully look at the documents, you cannot resolve them. And I will give you, it's like Elvis sighting. People think Kwame Nkrumah, the leader of Ghana, was at Bandung. People think Marshal Tito of Yugoslavia was at Bandung. Books have been written with this in there, but they were not. So who was in Bandung, who was not, how the conference went, so many myths that I thought I want to make sense of them. There's a lot of interest in Bandung. Interest is reviving. A lot of books on Bandung got written just within a year or two after the conference was held, and people forgot about it. But since the last 10 years, there have been dozens and dozens of books. And certainly the post-colonial scholarship, the international relations scholarship, they all have discovered Bandung. And, but I think most of them do that without the benefit of the range of primary sources that I have collected. And particularly the detailed day by day or even minute by minute recording of the Bandung Conference Political Committee proceedings. One of the anecdotes of Bandung was that, unlike today, everything is videotaped. Those days, they didn't have a video recorder, certainly in Indonesia, so they recorded it. But why did they record it? A lot of meetings of Asian summits these days are not recorded because people will be, leaders will not be forthcoming if everything is recorded. But in Bandung, they decided to record every single moment of the political committee, which was where the leaders of 29 countries met. Because India and Pakistan did not trust each other. And the Indians were actually rapporteurs in charge of recording, and the Pakistanis said, we have to record everything. We cannot take the summary notes from Indians. So everything was recorded to our benefit. But only 29 copies were made, and they pretty much have disappeared. No single country has the full records. So you have to piece them together. It's like detective work. And I don't think anybody else has the complete set of documents. And probably will not until I put them into the archives, which I will do after I finish writing my big book. Not this one has 2 chapters focusing on India and China, but there are tons of other material which will be basis of a forthcoming book. But without further ado, let me get into the topic. So, why was the Bandung Conference so important? It was the first international conference of post-colonial countries on their own soil. So leaders from the so-called third world, they met before in places like Brussels, Paris. But a lot of those meetings, in fact all those meetings, were before they become independent countries. So when they were still fighting with colonial powers. And also those meetings were held in Paris, London, Brussels, not in Jakarta, New Delhi, Beijing, not to mention Bandung. So this was, President Sukarno in his opening address said, the first intercontinental meeting of colored people on their home soil, and not in a Western capital. And this was the first international meeting of China, Communist China, which has become a revolution in '49. And all the international meetings China went to, including the Geneva Conference in Indochina, was with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was the big brother of Communist China. So this was the first meeting when China attended without the Soviet Union being present. The Soviet Union was not invited. This was the Asia-Africa gathering. So it gives China certain independence from Soviet Union. And that was precisely one of the reasons why Jawaharlal Nehru of India wanted to hold this meeting, because he wanted to wean China away from the Soviet Union. Made China look more Asian, or feel more Asian than communist. First international conference for Egypt's Nasser, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was the star of the conference. It was the first meeting he attended, international meeting, after taking over power in Egypt. It was Japan's first international conference in Asia after the defeat in Second World War and after the end of Japanese imperialism. And Japan was keeping a very low profile, knowing that there are a lot of suspicions of Japan in Asia still. So they used the conference to get back into the Asian diplomatic scene. So those are some of the important reasons why this conference is important, or significant. Some background, it was organized by the prime ministers of Burma, Ceylon, which later became Sri Lanka, India, Indonesia, and Pakistan. And Burma, of course, now is called Myanmar. These 5 prime ministers were collectively called Conference of Southeast Asian Prime Ministers, or Colombo Powers, because their first meeting of the 5 was actually in Colombo. Now this is very interesting, because today nobody thinks of India, Pakistan, or Sri Lanka as Southeast Asian countries. They are South Asian countries. Those days, there was no difference between Southeast Asia and South Asia. This regional differentiation only happened in the 60s. So India, Indonesia, both are part of Southeast Asia. And that is very, very important. Today the concept of South Asia as a distinctive region was not very popular, if it existed, but only very few people used it as South Asia. It was Southeast Asia. It was held in Bandung, which is West Java, not capital of Indonesia, but a very pretty city, former Dutch colony, which was kind of a summer resort of the Dutch. And because it's a little bit on the higher altitude. It lasted from 18th to 24th of April, 1955. 29 countries participated. There are some observers, but 29 independent countries participated. 4 from sub-Saharan Africa, although if you include Libya and Egypt, there will be kind of more African countries, but sub-Saharan Africa were 4. 7 Arab countries, including Egypt, and the rest are Asia, plus Turkey and Iran as well. So 29 countries participated. And this is kind of the official map produced by Indonesia of the participants, participating countries and the regions at Bandung. It's a little blurry. Some of the photographs are a little blurry because I collected them, taking pictures of pictures, and it was a kind of a struggle sometimes, but I have enough good photos as well. And those are the 5. This is also the official poster of the prime ministers, the Colombo powers that convened this conference. So we have UNO of Burma, John Kotlawala of Ceylon, Jawaharlal Nehru of India, Ali Jojo from Indonesia, and Muhammad Ali of Pakistan, the 5 conveners. Now, what are the objectives of this conference? Of course, advancing decolonization was the objective of most conferences in the developing world those days. But it was actually not necessarily the only or the most important objective. Because by that time, it was 1955, we're not talking about 1940s, when Nehru organized the Asian Relations Conference in 1947. It was all about decolonization. In 1955, the world had moved on. Most of Asia and the Middle East was independent. Maybe Singapore and Brunei were not. Africa was not. No country in Africa was independent. Ghana will become independent just a year afterwards. And, but decolonization was going to happen. But most important was superpower intervention. This was when the Cold War was escalating, especially in Asia and Southeast Asia, with the United States getting into Vietnam. And that was causing a lot of fear in the minds of countries, those 5 countries, that with the French were defeated in Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam, northern Vietnam. The Americans were, until then, supporting decolonization, decided that if they don't get into Vietnam, there will be communists will take over, not only Vietnam, but the entire Southeast Asia, the dominant theory of Dulles and Eisenhower. So that caused a lot of apprehension in the minds of, especially Nehru, but also President Sukarno, whose prime minister was a convener. Ali Jojo was a convener of the co-convener of Bandung. Creating new rules of international relations instead of following the old rules of international relations which are created by the Western powers. These prime ministers thought the conference will give them the space to lay out rules like non-intervention, non-interference, for example, or equality of states, or self-determination. Those rules were there, but they were not deeply abided by the superpowers, US and the Soviet Union, or breaking all those rules left, right, and center for the Cold War. So these countries wanted to lay down their rules. And in fact, one of the biggest achievements of Bandung was the statement of 10 principles, which came out at the end, principles of international relations. Also developed solidarity among the newly independent countries in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. So kind of third world solidarity. There was one objective of some of the countries was to create an organization, permanent organization. That didn't happen. Talk about that later. But certainly create post-colonial solidarity among the newly independent countries. Promote economic development and self-reliance. Most of the countries that have become independent, in fact all of them, are still linked very much to their colonial masters economically. So economic self-reliance was one of the key objectives. And engaging communist China. This was also one of the most important rationale, especially for Nehru, that China has become communist and no country in Asia had recognized China except Burma, which is the first country to recognize communist China. India was the second country. But China was deeply isolated, and Nehru felt that it was better to engage China than isolate it. And so he disagreed with the policy of the British and especially the United States to isolate China. Nehru felt that engaging China will make it more amenable to the rules of the region or international relations, and pose less of a threat to the region than isolating or containing it. So those are broadly the objectives. So I want to talk about three phases of Bandung. Some of it is known, some of it is not very well known or not known at all. And one is that the Bandung, the reading of Bandung, three readings of Bandung. Bandung as an Anglo-American conspiracy, and I want to emphasize the word conspiracy, because it was a conspiracy. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there was an attempt to subvert, influence, manipulate this conference by Britain and the United States. As the end of the Pan-Asian dream, the idea of creating an Asian federation, which was a dream of Nehru, but also of other people like Aung San of Burma and Sun Yat-sen of China, that ended after that, this conference. And then the beginning of a new international order. This is where this bending, like the reshaping the Cold War happened. The Bandung laid the way for a new kind of international order and reshaped the Cold War. And I'll talk about that as well. So the Anglo-American conspiracy. When this conference started, Britain was losing its colonies, but it still had enough. It had a lot of colonies in Caribbean, Africa, and also in Singapore and Brunei. And it didn't want these colonies to be gone. No further decolonization was a major British objective. And they won't say that today, but it was very clear in the documents. The United States was not worried about colonialism, decolonization, but the United States was a supporter initially of decolonization. But the United States was more afraid of communism than of colonialism. So the American view was that if you don't stop China, if these countries bring China into Asia, the table, Asian table, and leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru promoting this idea of non-alignment, neutrality, don't take sides in the Cold War. This is bad for Americans. And the person who was, I think Mr. Dulles is kind of hiding there. I put that. Mr. Dulles was Man of the Year, a Time Magazine Man of the Year in 1954. That is the same year he founded SEATO, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. And that basically broke any respect of any links he had with Nehru. Nehru absolutely hated Cold War pacts like SEATO, NATO. He hated NATO because NATO was talking about intervening in Goa, because Goa was a Portuguese colony, and Portugal was a NATO member. But he hated SEATO even more because it was a military pact right in the doorstep, which has Pakistan as a member. And so Nehru was always very antagonistic to Mr. Dulles. He used to call to his friends, Dulles. And in a meeting with Mao, which has been recorded and declassified recently, he called Dulles as a menace. So I call, Dulles the menace. Like Dennis the menace, okay? So he had all kinds of epithets for Dulles, and Dulles reciprocated. He hated Nehru, so there was no communication going on. Mr. Eisenhower actually was quite fond of Nehru, but foreign policy at that time was conducted by Dulles, although there is some controversy about whether Eisenhower was playing the good guy to Dulles' bad guy, but certainly there was no love lost between Nehru and Dulles. And Dulles' pact, Southeast Asian Treaty Organized in 1954, was what Nehru provoked into organizing the Bandung Conference. So there was a trade-off between Britain and the US. Britain asked America, forget about decolonization, okay? We will help you to contain communism, and you don't provide any political or any support for decolonization. And therefore, we will both gain. So Britain, with support from the United States and to a lesser extent France, because France had Indochina, was just losing the colonies there, undertook a massive diplomatic and intelligence operation to prevent leaders from attending the conference with a lot of friendly countries. They managed to actually stop the leaders of Singapore and Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, from attending Bandung. So those are still British dominions. But then they realized that they can't completely stop the newly independent countries from going there, but manipulate them influence them by providing them with information, resolutions, what to say, what not to say, and conducting also intelligence operations to make sure that they're doing that at Bandung. It is said that there are more spies in Bandung than leaders or delegates. So this is the British document that lays it out, what was the nature of the Anglo-American conspiracy. So you can read these 3 objectives directly from the file. There was an interdepartmental meeting in Britain just a couple of months before Bandung, and the meeting agreed that there were the 3 goals that the British should pursue, or the West should pursue at Bandung. To prevent the adoption of the conference by the conference of any resolution, advantages to the communists, or inimical to British interests. Read colonialism, British colonialism. To prevent the emergence of, from the conference of any more lasting Afro-Asian bloc, and to cause the maximum embarrassment to the communists, specifically of China. And keep that in mind. We'll come back to see whether these goals are actually realized in the end when we make an assessment of the conference. Now, British divided the world into 4 categories of participants, some which are not friendly, no approach should be made, those to which they should approach with documents, or leave it to the French and the Americans, because Americans are close to Philippines, French are close to the South Vietnamese, so, or North African countries. But then those who should be given factual information, but to whom we should make no special approach, like Burma, Indonesia, were a little independent-minded, and those who should inform and also seek to persuade, meaning manipulate, Commonwealth countries. And those included Gold Coast, Ghana, Iraq, Japan, Jordan, Laos, Lebanon, Libya, Persia, Siam, Siamese Thailand, Sudan, Turkey, and Vietnam. That is the state of Vietnam, South Vietnam. Okay, now we move to some American role in this. So a few days before, just 2 weeks before the Bandung was to happen, so Philippine Foreign Minister Carlos Rumula meets Eisenhower in Dallas in Washington. And you can see that Dallas gives him a resolution, draft resolution, a short draft resolution. The copy is there, it's declassified American documents, which he should introduce at the Bandung conference. So basically telling people, their friends, what they should do, what they should say. It is a little insulting to start with, but it's also the reality, because the United States has that much influence over the Philippines at that time. And this is replicated, and I have tons of documentation from American and British archives of how this was done through ambassadors, through direct contact, basically telling friendly governments what they should say, what they shouldn't say, and therefore move the conference in the direction of the Western interest and away from Chinese or Indian influence. About India and China, what were their objectives? They had pretty similar objectives. This is the height of India-China Vai-Vai, Indichini-Vai-Vai era, where Indians and Chinese are brothers. And Nehru being the second country, India being the second country to recognize communist China, and Nehru being a big believer in engaging rather than isolating China. It doesn't mean Nehru did not fear communism, but he thought the better way to deal with China is to engage rather than contain or to provoke it. Whether that strategy worked or not, we can come back to it later, and it's still a moot question today, whether China should be engaged or contained, and we have debates on this going on still in Washington for the last 20 years. So India's main objective was to win China away from the Soviet bloc, make China Asian rather than communist, to promote China as an Asian power, to secure Chinese pledge of non-interference, and to mobilize opposition to US Cold War policy, especially CETA. The Chinese objective was to gain Asian acceptance of the communist regime, because that was new and distrusted. To identify with the post-colonial world, the Chinese wanted to identify with the third world. China was never formally colonized. So Mao called China a semi-colony, because it lost treaty ports to Britain and the imperial powers, but never formally colonized like India was. So China had a problem when India could blend into the third world as a leader, but China had to work at it. And Bandung conference provided the opportunity for China to identify the Afro-Asian bloc, emerging Afro-Asian bloc. To gain diplomatic support against the US containment strategies, the United States was pursuing a very strong anti-communist China policy, supporting Taiwan. Even they were planning to use nuclear weapons. If China would have invaded Vietnam, the United States had planned to use nuclear weapons against China, which is one reason why China developed its own nuclear weapons. And then China's other goal, which Nehru never shared, was to create a permanent organization, an Afro-Asian regional organization. Okay, there's a lot more on this China-India objectives from a lot of Chinese and Indian archives in the book. There are 2 chapters on this. So this is Jawaharlal Nehru arriving in Bandung. And you can see behind him, there are 3 photos collaged together. So this is Premier Unu of Burma. This is Nasser of Egypt. And this is Ali Sastromojoyo, the Prime Minister of Indonesia, was greeting Unu there. They traveled together from Rangoon. So Nasser came to Delhi. Nehru picked him up on his Air India plane, went to Rangoon, picked up Unu, and came to Bandung. So transport was a problem those days. There were not that many flights. And India was one of the first countries to have an airline, Tata Airline basically, which became Air India. But what about Chou En-lai? How did he come to Bandung? And there is the tale becomes even more interesting. And the conspiracy, different kind of conspiracy. The United States may or may not have been involved. But Chou En-lai nearly lost his life. A tragedy. So Chou En-lai was supposed to travel on an Air India plane. China did not have an airline, did not have planes. He chartered an Air India plane. He was supposed to fly. The Air India plane was supposed to go to Mumbai or Bombay those days, to Hong Kong. Chou En-lai will come to Hong Kong on a Soviet plane in Hong Kong, get picked up by the Air India plane and go to Bandung. So on the 11th, that plane takes off, supposed to carry Chou En-lai, but Chou En-lai did not come. In the last minute, he cancelled. That plane, a few hours later, crashed into South China Sea. Actually, it didn't crash. The Air India pilot was very good. The plane had an explosion, and the pilot managed to land the plane literally on the sea, South China Sea. So, unfortunately, these things are rarely successful. So everybody but 3 people survived. The captain died, but the flight engineer and 2 other crew members survived. All the passengers were the Chinese journalists and a couple of other, some Indian delegates, they died. And it was called Kashmir Princess. Talk of a bad name, and this became a crisis with a nice name, but it was a bad fortune, bad luck for this plane and the people who lost their lives. So Chou En-lai actually came to Kunming, then Kunming flew to Rangoon, and he took another Air India plane. And this is interesting, because you would think that the Chinese leader who nearly lost his life would not fly Air India again. But he actually specifically asked for an Air India plane, a Constellation, and took it to Rangoon, and from there we met his Indian and Unu who were already camping there, and then he went to Bandung separately, but on an Air India plane. But they had to land in Singapore because of bad weather, but anyway, he made it. Now, why didn't Chou En-lai actually come to the original flight that he was supposed to take from Hong Kong? The official Chinese explanation that he had appendicitis or some sort of appendicitis, that was the official explanation at that time. How did the plane crash? Well, I think it's fairly well known now that it was sabotaged by Kuomintang, Chiang Kai-shek's regime in Taiwan. But why did Chou En-lai not come? Did he have any premonition that the plane was going to crash, or he was really having appendicitis? So later on, some Chinese sources revealed that he actually had an inkling. The communist government in China had some intelligence that the plane would be sabotaged. So he pretended to be ill and missed that flight. Now, it puts Zhou Enlai in a very difficult situation. If he knew that the plane is going to cross, and he still allowed his own Chinese colleagues to board the plane, journalists, then, he was killing them. These people are going to die. That's not very humane. And Zhou Enlai had a very positive image in China and also in the rest of the world. If he really did that, that's bad. But if he did not do that, then he's just damn lucky that he really he knew when to be ill, really. But this became a big sort of mystery that has not been completely resolved. Although the consensus is that it was sabotaged by Kuomintang in Hong Kong airport, and it might have been done with the knowledge of the CIA, but not conclusively proven, the CIA leaked. But what is clear is that China got a lot of propaganda mileage out of this. So Chinese say, Zhou Enlai was brave. They produced a movie on the 50th anniversary of Bandung called Zhou Enlai in Bandung, talking about heroism. And the fact that Zhou Enlai said, I want to still take an Air India plane, means that he trusted India, and he showed his flexibility, understanding, and his commitment to India-China brotherhood. So depends on how you interpret it. And if you give Zhou Enlai benefit of the doubt, then he simply was very lucky. But the fact that he canceled this trip in the very last minute, and some sources with pretty good connections in the Chinese government said he actually knew about it, doesn't put him in a good light. So anyway, they arrive. So here is Zhou Enlai arriving in Bandung, and we move. Nehru being greeted by Sukarno, and very, very warmly. The second picture is Sukarno's wife is there, Devi Sukarno, and serious embrace. And here is Nehru, and walking with Uno. So in Bandung, they stayed in hotels and they walked to the conference hall. It was a very short distance. But sometimes Sukarno, when he came to open the conference, he took a motorcade. Zhou Enlai walking as well. This is Prince Sihanouk, very young. He is the only leader who was present in Bandung that I have actually met and interviewed. So I did that 10 years ago in Phnom Penh. And he was no longer the king. He had abdicated to his son, but he was still quite in good health at that time. And I talked about Bandung. He was the youngest person at that time, youngest leader at Bandung. Here is Sukarno arriving in the motorcade to open the conference. There were a lot of enthusiasm among the crowd. This is a scene just outside the conference center. The people, this was a people's conference. People got very, very excited about Bandung, Indonesians in particular. And to this day, Indonesians are excited. You talk about Bandung. I'm kind of a movie star because when I give this lecture in Indonesia, people come and take pictures with me and take my autograph because I know so much about. The foreign minister once came to one of my lectures and said, you know more about Bandung than any of us, this generation. So it's very popular. This was the conference hall, which you can still visit if you go to Bandung. Beautiful city, by the way. This is the President Sukarno opening the Bandung conference in his speech where he said, this is the first intercontinental gathering of colored people in the history of mankind. And this is the leader sitting, Muhammad Ali of Pakistan, it's right here. Okay. This is, I think you should know, he was not Prime Minister for very long, but he was a very forceful person there. At Bandung. He was ousted in a military coup a year later. And Nehru is out there as well. So, just to give you a flavor of what the conference hall looked like. And Sukarno is sitting right there. And Africa was underrepresented. Not many of this conference decided that only countries with formal independence should be invited. There were some exceptions, but not a lot of exceptions. So a lot of Africans who came here, like African National Congress, sent 2 representatives, but South Africa was still under apartheid at that time. And this is Ghana, delegates of Ghana, with you recognize who she is, Indira Gandhi. She was a very, very forceful presence, everywhere to be seen, with her father at that time in Bandung. So Ghana's Nkrumah was prevented from coming to the conference by British, so they sent 2 priests who happened to be in Southeast Asia to be the delegate. But they didn't have really any voting power, but they gave kind of a flavor to the conference, African flavor. Food and prayer, you can see. This is a very interesting person, King Faisal. Now think of the Saudi king sitting with other people praying. This is Bandung actually happened around the time of Ramadan, and it was very much a religious event. Although you have all religions represented there, there was no class of civilizations there of any kind. And this is the kind of food, Indonesian food they're all eating. Archbishop Macarius of Cyprus. So it was really a great gathering of all leaders from various religion and national ethnic backgrounds. This is another kind of meeting come lunch with, you can see Nehru, Indira Gandhi, Nasser, all in kind of good mood and enjoying conversation and food. Okay, going back to the topic. The second thing I was talking about, how did Bandung end the Pan-Asian dream? The conference went into a lot of controversy. And there are 4 that are particularly important. One was this idea that communism was a new form of colonialism. So out of the blue, the Ceylonese Prime Minister, John Kotlawala, attacked communism. He said, we are here to condemn colonialism, but we forget that there is another kind of colonialism. It's called communist colonialism, and that's what is happening in Eastern Europe. Look at what the Soviet Union has done to countries like Hungary and Romania, Bulgaria. So there's a new colonialism, we should be condemning that. And that got Chou En-lai very upset. He was, until then, maintaining a very calm posture, but he got very upset. And Nehru also got very angry. Nehru sided with Chou En-lai and the communists. He said, the East European countries are not colonies. They are independent countries. So he took aside John Kotlawala and he said, Sir John, why did you say that? Why didn't you check with me first? And John Kotlawala said, why should I? You don't check what you said at the conference with me. So they laughed this off. And Chou En-lai next time had a very big speech where he refuted this. But that sort of created a divide. And I want to come back and tell you, how did John Kotlawala get this idea that he has to say communism as a new form of colonialism? Here, the British had passed him a document. In any discussion, read this, full mention of full attention should be directed at communist colonialism. And more important, it's a little vague. This one says, this is a file cover note by another British official. Sir John Kotlawala made good use of his brief. So if you're a fan of John Kotlawala, he's a great leader, don't be upset with me, but it is the truth. So this is one example of how the Western powers were using their friends and allies. And this is, in a sense, Sri Lanka. Ceylon was actually in the neutral camp, but still did the bid for the British. And this is the political committee where the leaders met. And this is, you can see, this is a very interesting picture because this is Kotlawala and this is Chou En-lai. They're because of C and C, they're sitting next to each other. So a picture can say 1,000 more words. So moving back to another controversy was 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, which India and China had negotiated over Tibet a few years back. And India and China wanted to present this as the principles that the conference would adopt. They're pretty kind of motherhood and apple pie. Sorry, am I okay? sort of a very general principles, but the United States and Britain told their allies, especially Turkey and Philippines and Lebanon, do not accept, because peaceful coexistence is a communist formula which was developed by Khrushchev, and do not get it accepted as the conference's principles. So we had a lot of money and time and energy spent haggling out whether these words will be there or not. And in the end, the 5 principles became 10 principles. They were diluted, although the principle of non-interference remained. Peaceful coexistence did not stay. Instead, Chou and Lai made a very practical suggestion that we call it living together in peace, as opposed to peaceful coexistence. And that was seen as a big concession made by Chou and Lai, demonstrating its flexibility. Military pact, Nehru bitterly condemned CETO as a new form of colonialism, and he was contested, refuted by Pakistan was expected, but Lebanon as well as Philippines and Turkey. And that meant there was a clear divide whether these newly independent countries would join military pacts sponsored by Western powers. And finally, permanent organization. Here, Nehru did not agree with Chou and Lai that there should be a permanent organization of Asian and African countries. So moving on. This is Nehru with Muhammad Ali. You can see that Nehru is not smiling very much. But I want to show you, this is Nasser and Carlos Romulo. Romulo was very vital there, very active, and Nasser was really the star of the conference. Very charismatic, very popular. So who owned, Chou and Lai or Nehru? This is a perennial debate about Bandung. So let me give you some observations from different people who participated in the conference, both Indian but also Western. So this is from Krishna Menon. V.K. Krishna Menon was Defense Minister of India, very controversial figure, seen as very close to Nehru. The recent studies say that Nehru did not trust him very much. But he said Nehru was the spirit of the Bandung conference, not by running around, but by his great personality and his Catholicity of outlook, like cosmopolitan outlook. He was a quietening element. He was kind of elder statesman and experienced elder statesman at that. Chou and Lai was introduced by everyone by me. Krishna Menon was kind of a bit vain person. He always wanted to take the stage. I don't say that Chou a kind of younger brother to us, but he cooperated. We found him very useful. So he's going to make use of Chou and Lai. Now, Subimal Dutt, who was Nehru's foreign secretary, he also paid tribute to Nehru. It was Chou and Lai's first debut in an inter-Asian African gathering. Although he was calm and unruffled, he did not seem quite sure of his position. Nehru took him as a younger brother. During the midday recesses, the two used to walk hand in hand along the streets of Bandung with crowds cheering on both sides. And the British also thought, Chou had one stage said, any English phrase which was acceptable to Nehru would be acceptable to him. So that was the level of trust, according to British, that had between Chou and Lai didn't speak English, so he trusted Nehru's translation. Now things will change very rapidly. 7 years later, they will have a war between India and China. Romulo thought Nehru was great. With great, Prime Minister Nehru spoke, as he always speaks, with great impact. Those who are privileged to hear him. But he does say something that it was a revealing commentary on the changing times and shifting scenes of the Asia-African story that Mr. Nehru at Bandung caught an altogether different figure from the serene, imperturbable man who deeply impressed delegates at the New Delhi conference in 1947. So Nehru was perturbed, according to Romulo. So Nehru is speaking here, and I'll tell you Nehru's mood in pictures. This is Chou and Lai speaking. So compare and contrast. This is Chou and Lai talking to Sukarno, very calm, very suave, very smiling, and he maintained that posture throughout the conference except once during that meeting when he was attacked as a communist colonialist. And here is a great picture of Krishna Menon having a drink, not alcohol, with Chou Enlai. And even when I show this picture to the Chinese, and I go to China quite often, in the Chou Enlai's old house, when I showed them this picture, the Chinese, they can't believe it, because they didn't realize Chou Enlai was capable of laughing and enjoying it so much. I also met his translator, interpreter rather. So it's a very rare picture. What about Nehru? So Nehru is always pointing his finger and making a point. By those days you can smoke in conferences. So, and Unu was so tired of listening to Nehru's lectures. So this is Ali Sastramojojo, Indonesia Prime Minister, and Nehru lecturing him all the time. This was very commonly observed. And here it goes. If you are Unu, you will be frightened when somebody comes at you and pokes your finger at you. So Nehru was not in a good mood most of the time. But let's see what he has to say about this. Well, first let's see what the British had a different assessment. He thought actually Nehru did pretty well. That Nehru was deliberately remained in the background, although he was extremely active in promoting informal contacts. And there are no substantial reasons for believing that his own standing in Asia has in fact suffered. But I think it was a little generous. Nehru's standing did suffer after Bandung. Australia actually also thought Nehru did pretty well. It was Nehru who insisted on Chou being invited, who indoctrinated him carefully before the conference, who sponsored him in the difficult opening days at Bandung. Mr. Nehru did not strike me as feeling that he had been supplanted by Chou. The Australian ambassador did meet Nehru after the conference. But the Australian ambassador also predicted that sooner or later India and China will find themselves in rivalry, and that the only dangerous potential enemy of India is China. So it was quite prophetic at that time. So he did not agree that it was commonly said that in Jakarta today that Chou's rise in prestige was proportionate to Nehru's, the cause of Nehru's decline in prestige. The Western observers did not agree with that, especially the British and the Australians. The Americans actually thought Chou Enlai won and Nehru lost. So Nehru himself comes back and writes this. He was very fond of Edwina Mountbatten. Some people think they had a platonic affair. So he writes a letter to Edwina Mountbatten, the wife of Lord Louis Mountbatten, last Viceroy of India. So Chou Enlai was a star performer. He did not say very much, but naturally he attracted most attention. He was the mysterious figure representing a country which was playing an important, perhaps dangerous part in the world. He was quiet and restrained. He did not bring forward any controversial proposition. He spent long hours in subcommittees and went to every party. There were dozens of parties. So far as I was concerned, I behaved generally. Sorry, this is once. It's a typo. Once I lost my temper, but regained it soon after. On 2 or 3 occasions, I spoke with some vigor. It is true, however, that I was often very irritated, and it was with some difficulty that I restrained myself. So kind of a confession to a good friend that he never made it to anybody else. So we are now concluding. Was the Bandung conference successful? Well, remember the Western goal was to prevent the further rise of anti-colonial sentiments, to cause maximum embarrassment to China, gain support for CETA and its expansion, and prevent the rise of a neutralist and non-aligned bloc. What really happened to these objectives? So the British themselves admitted that they failed, that actually linking communism with colonialism, as they tried to do, actually reminded people of colonialism rather than communism. So this is kind of a bitter hand-wringing exercise by the British after the conference. The British also admitted that they failed in their other objectives. China's influence in Asia was much augmented instead of causing maximum embarrassment to China. Anti-communism, as distinct from non-communism, was proportionally diminished. In consequence, any hope that might have existed of additional states could be attracted to CETA has now vanished. So CETA expansion not going to happen. The American goal lost. and a growing tendency towards a neutralist attitude in line with India's position, to be expected. So that means a neutralist bloc is actually emerging. So all the goals that the West pursued were either compromised, even though the immediate assessment of Bandung was that the West had a victory, especially the American assessment that West had a victory, although Bandung did exceptionally well. And the US Department of State also acknowledged that the nations assembled at Bandung without little prior experience in running large international conferences and with only decades or less of independent participation in world politics, managed to organize a meeting which rejected the discipline of any of the conferences by sponsoring powers, yet found its way to common ground with efficiency and dispatch. The conference succeeded in demonstrating that there is an Asian-African consensus. Very different from the immediate, these are declassified documents 30 years later. The immediate assessment was that Bandung was a failure, but it actually wasn't like that in their own assessment and in reality. So to conclude, Bandung might have sown the seeds of Sino-Indian rivalry. This did have an impact on Nehru. Nehru came back and never talked about Asia-Africa unity ever again, or Asian unity. He moved on to non-alignment, to the world larger stage. And he used Bandung to create the non-aligned movement with Sukarno, with Nasser, and also Nkrumah, who didn't come. Nkrumah organized a conference of African countries, which he adopted the principles of Bandung, because he had been prevented from coming there. But Africans actually accepted Bandung principles. So Nkrumah, Ghana was the first independent country of Africa, and organized African unity along those lines. I argue that neither India nor China own, both actually lost. Because the Southeast Asian countries, where this conference was being held, saw how India is quarreling with India is quarreling with Pakistan, and vice versa. And India and China are two big countries, and they have also a lot of politics between them. So the smaller countries decided to go on their own. So create the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Neither China nor India were invited to join, to this day, by the way. So India, which was the leader of Asian regional movement, which was considered part of Southeast Asia, lost that perch and won't get it back until the 1990s, when it was invited to become a partner of ASEAN, and China also around the same time. So both China and India are down and out, and Southeast Asia wins out because it can find space for itself in developing regionally. It reset the Cold War because this is the first conference China went without Soviet Union, and China made a lot of concessions to the Americans, including a promise to have dialogue, offer to have dialogue on Taiwan with the United States without consulting the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union was very unhappy that China is becoming independent, and this could have sown the seeds of the Sino-Soviet split, big thing in Cold War. Nasser goes to the conference. The American intelligence, I have a copy of that, says Nasser is pro-Western. Nasser comes back 6 months later, nationalizes the Suez Canal, buys weapons from Czechoslovakia, really from the Soviet Union, buys Czechoslovakia, becomes totally anti-Western. And then we have the Suez crisis. And because Nasser actually met Chou Enlai at the conference, asked for Chinese weapons, Chou Enlai said, we don't make weapons, we get them from the Soviet Union, we'll introduce you to the Soviet agent. So, which he did, and Soviet Union, instead of giving weapons directly to Egypt, gave it to Czechoslovakia. So that changes the whole dynamic of the Middle East and the Cold War. And birth of non-alignment. This is basically a big story. Again, as I said, Nehru gets tired of Asian unity or Asia-Africa unity. He goes to the larger stage and creates the non-aligned movement with other leaders, which became a very powerful force in the Cold War. So in that sense, he moved to a now global stage as opposed to the regional stage. So this is the various ways it actually created a new international order. So a personal moment, I conclude with that. This man here is Ruslan Abdulghani, who was the Secretary General of the Bandung Conference. And I met him just a year before he passed away at his office. He was already 89 years old, and I did a recording of an hour-long recording of his experience at Bandung, which got me into this project. So I paid some tribute to him at this and conclude my presentation and take your questions.
We're going to talk about 15 15 minutes of questions, so we have some microphones. Does anybody have a question to start the conversation? A question? Over
Yes.
here? Go ahead, they haven't got to you the microphone. Go, sir, go ahead.
I can listen to you.
Okay.
Kisar Master, hi. What would you say the effect of this conference was on the, when you look at in the future, next 20, 30, 40 years, and how did it change the world because of this conference?
Thank you. I think one of the lessons of Bandung is how to deal with China. Remember, then the big issue was how to deal with China. China has gone through the revolution and was seen as a threat throughout Asia. It's not that different from today, when China is rising and also seen as a threat to many of its neighbors, if not all. So how do you deal with China? So Nehru's approach was to engage rather than contain China. A lot of people in the 1990s and 2000s thought that policy is still good. They didn't invoke Nehru, but they thought engaging China is better than containing China. But the moral of the story is, if you want to be a realist, you can engage China, but don't give up the fallback position. What if China doesn't want to be engaged? So Nehru's big mistake, in my view, was I don't think he completely trusted China, but he also didn't pay attention to defenses, the Indian security and defense apparatus. So I think the moral would be, the lesson would be that I think engaging China is still the best way, but at the same time, one should plan for what if China doesn't want to be engaged and behaves in that. See, the Chinese lost Bandung in the long term. They owned Bandung. Chou Enlai was very charming and really very effective. But he made the promise of non-interference. Then he comes back and Mao overrules him and starts supporting communist movements throughout Southeast Asia. So as a result, all the gains China had made were lost. And China did not have diplomatic relations with any Southeast Asian country well into the 70s, until it stopped and made a promise to stop supporting the Communist Party of Malaya, Communist Party of Thailand, Communist Party of Indonesia, Communist Party of Philippines. So that also is a lesson for China, that China also will be taken by its own word. In 2003, when everybody was talking about China's charm offensive, I wrote an article which is in the New York Times website this is a little bit like Bandung, that everybody thinks engaging China has a charm offensive. Chou Enlai had a charm offensive, but China will be judged by its action, not by its words. So then China went and interfered in Southeast Asian countries and was ostracized. If it does the same thing, these countries are not going to accept China's words on face value. So that is another. But the situation is a little different. China has a lot more military and economic power. It can do a lot of things it could not do then. And I am also saying that China is not a monolith. No matter what you hear, there are a lot of people in China who want to live very peacefully with their neighbors. And I can tell you that because I go there all the time. So I think containing China is impossible and also counterproductive. At the same time, preparing for kind of a situation where China doesn't fulfill its words, all its peaceful rights, it also will be a wise policy. So I think that is the main lesson of the Bandung Conference.
Thank you.
This conference happened in 1955, and yet in 1962 China invaded India.
1962, yes.
Could you summarize for us quickly what is the genesis of it and what happened? Because during the conference they seem to be like very friendly.
You'll take another lecture. And, it is really, really complicated. And I stopped following India-China bilateral relations after 55. Remember, my book is called Sino-Indian Encounters in Southeast Asia. So I look at it, what happens in Southeast Asia, not what happens between China and India. It's called East of India, South of China, meaning Southeast Asia is south of China, east of India. That's what Southeast Asia according to some people, got his name in area studies. But if you ask me, it is probably a combination of a misperception that Nehru certainly did not make his intentions very clear, did not prepare. But I think it could also be that Mao was getting into the Cultural Revolution, found India as a soft target. So, teach India a lesson, and India is not preparing, is not prepared. So we can actually get it over with very quickly and get some territory. And Mao also was trying to divert attention from domestic problems. This is Cultural Revolution. 40 million people died in China, and China was in turmoil. So a time of domestic instability is a very dangerous time for foreign policy. So my best explanation is that yes, Nehru was may not have been too trusting, but was trusting enough. He didn't negotiate, look for any compromise, but he was not also prepared for any confrontation with China. He did not think the Chinese will attack, and Krishna Menon told him that a socialist country will not attack a non-aligned country, and that is completely wrong. In the Chinese side, Zhou Enlai himself probably wanted to have a deal with Nehru, but Mao did not. Mao was calling the shots, and Mao was going through Cultural Revolution and wanted to teach India, which is a soft target, a lesson. So 6 years is a very long time, as in this case, 7 years in international politics. There's a question there, I'll come back to you.
Let's go here and then to you, so go ahead. Okay.
So, Professor, as you stated, one of the goals of the West was to stop a non-aligned bloc from forming, and a non-aligned bloc actually ended up emerging. Do you think this would signify the creation of the New World Order that you mentioned earlier?
Sorry, can you I didn't get that quite the question.
He's saying, go ahead, repeat.
Can you repeat that a little louder? There's an echo here.
One more time.
Do you think this would signify the creation of the new international order that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
From the non-aligned group.
Yeah, the new international order. I mean, I think the non-aligned movement was a new development in Cold War and world politics, because until then, people are talking about what to do with the US and the Soviet Union, because you are being forced to take sides. And either the Americans are putting pressure on you, or the Russian, Soviet Union is putting pressure. So Nehru had already thought about non-alignment way back in the 40s, when he was still in British jail. But this gave him a chance to put it into practice, because he could find enough African, he thought Pakistanis or Filipinos not interested. But certainly Egypt is interested. Egypt is the big power in the Middle East. Ghana would be interested, because Ghana is the most influential country those days in sub-Saharan Africa. So if those countries are important and interested in non-alignment, not taking sides, but maintaining an independent position, then he has a global platform. And it's a new international order in the sense that it was no longer strictly a bipolar order, and other countries didn't have a choice. Either you have to choose the Soviet Union or the United States. So you now had a choice. You can take a third way. And there are more than 130 countries, members of the non-aligned movement. And it still continues, lost a bit of its relevance, but it still continues. Some people argue that between China and the United States, one can also apply non-alignment. The Indians talk about non-alignment 2.0. And actually, a lot of people think India is getting close to the United States. That's a bit of a stretch. Some people in India are, but the Congress party still wants to maintain a distance. They don't want to push China too far by siding with the United States. The relations between India and the United States are much better than they historically have been, but it's not at the expense of relations with China. So I think that ethos of a new international order is to have a choice, a third way between siding with one or the other of the two superpowers. And that's the sense I thought it was a new international order. And how this happened, Bandung was a key stage. A lot of people don't realize that, because that's where Nasser met the communists for the first time. That's where Nehru got fed up with Asian unity and went to the global non-alignment movement. That's where Sino-Soviet split was germinated. So it is actually far more diplomatically significant than people give it credit for or recognize, because a lot of people write about Bandung without the benefit of a lot of these documents.
Any question?
Your questions?
Besides Nehru being overly trustful of Krishna Menon, and of course China being kind of jealous of India as a democracy, becoming more popular, and all that, versus a communist type of a country. Isn't it ironic that the India, which was trying to sponsor China, against the U.S.-British philosophy, it was Kennedy who, gave emergency military supplies to India that stopped the Chinese invasion. And also, what I heard was that he threatened China that if they went further into India, that the U.S. would get involved.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. It is true that during the war, the United States, under Kennedy administration, offered to provide aid to India and provided some aid. But it was too little, too late. And the war did not last very long either. Okay, the Chinese also stopped it before it went too far. So I think the problem is not Kennedy. The problem was Eisenhower administration, and not President Eisenhower personally, but Dulles. He had this missionary zeal about containing communism and creating military pacts. And Nehru was genuinely opposed to pacts. He was kind of viscerally opposed to military alliances. It was not, he was faking. It was just ingrained in him, hardwired into his mind. And Dulles did not listen to Nehru, despite the fact that India and US are both democracies. But there was this no common ground. So it's very unfortunate because the United States and India had a lot of economic partnership. The United States provided substantial aid to India, setting up all the agricultural colleges, PL 420, we all know about this. But geopolitically, there was no common ground. And this is why that particular stage when Kennedy might have, I don't know, whether Kennedy's intervention stopped China from going further, or the Chinese decided they can't go any further. They wanted a shortened, swift operation. But that period was an exception, and not the normal pattern of US-China. By the way, Nehru was very well liked by Harry Truman. When Nehru came to Washington, Truman sent Air Force One to London to pick him up. Now, this American president never sends his plane to pick up a foreign leader. My sense is that Eisenhower generally liked India, but he was in foreign policy persuaded by Dulles, and Dulles certainly did not like India. There's no question about it.
Norbert.
Thank you for a fascinating presentation. I have a question that's sort of partly methodological, historiographical, and partly maybe speculative. I think sort of two angles of the same question. Your argument was very much organized around individuals. So Nehru said this, Chu and Lai thought that, Kennedy, Dulles, whatever. So to what extent do you think that Bandung was about the individuals who were involved versus, say, economic systems clashing or ideological ideas clashing, and that sort of the speculative flip side of the same question, would this have turned out the same way if different individuals had been at this conference? Does that make sense?
That's an excellent question. In fact, very pertinent. I focus on individuals deliberately. In my writing, I normally do not focus on individuals. So I focus more on organizations or norms and structures. This is a bit different because I guess the way I did the research, and also I wanted to write this for the general interest. A lot of so-called academic books on Bandung which do not touch about individuals. And this is really the missing link. And also I thought this will interest the general reader as opposed to academics like me. And I find that fascinating. And I also, as I told you, I met quite a few people who were actually present there, including late King Sihanouk. I actually have a nice picture with Sihanouk. I couldn't find it in my computer, but I even have some gifts that he gave me. And I just feel that this comes alive when you talk about individuals. And by the way, the diplomatic records and declassified elements are also individual based. The US intelligence have profiles of individual leaders, which I've cut some copies where they say Nasser pro-West. I actually wanted to show you, which is basically exactly the opposite of what happened 6 months later. So I think this is a deliberate strategy to reach out to a wider audience. Would it be different if I had focused on countries or different individuals? I think leaders matter a lot those days. Certainly if we had not Nehru, but somebody else as the leader. Nehru was so overwhelmingly important in Indian foreign policy that it almost inhibited the development of foreign policy talent or international relations scholarship even in India. It was so dominant. And if Zhou Enlai was not there, I don't think any other Chinese leader could have pulled it through because he had that personality. And again, somebody who has done a lot of research into Zhou Enlai, a lot of Chinese will agree with me that there was no other leader at that time in China who could have done what Zhou Enlai did. And you also had very strong leaders then. Later on, and I wrote a piece in Financial Times 10 years ago on this, the leaders were leaders then. Later leaders were technocratic. Things are changing, but look at Manmohan Singh. Look at Hu Jintao, an engineer. Manmohan Singh, an academic, So Bandung actually had political leaders who fought for independence. They were much more forceful than later leaders. And now we have a change where we have Modi and Xi, and those are back to strong personalities, but they were strongmen. They are strongmen. Those days, we didn't have, this is, by the way, before the coups happened. One of the sad things about Bandung is that few years after Bandung, a lot of countries go through military coups. So, Philippines has a military coup, Pakistan has a military coup, Sri Lanka turns a bit authoritarian. So it's as if that Bandung gave a fillip to kind of third world solidarity and legitimized strong personalities. But those people who went to Bandung were genuinely popular leaders who had fought for their independence. They had a lot of legitimacy, so it makes all the more sense to focus on that. But thank you for the question. I will tell that to the publisher.
And let Don Robinson ask the last question.
Were there any Vietnamese representatives?
Sorry?
Were there any Vietnamese representatives?
Vietnamese.
Vietnamese at the conference?
Yeah, South Vietnam and state of Vietnam and the North Vietnam both were there.
Was there any extensive discussion of the fact that...
No, they kept a pretty low profile. So this goes back, and Bandung was not a place where everybody had equal opportunity. Partly the language problem, partly also domestic problems. Like the Africans, for example, had very little real participation. We had Liberia, we had Sudan, we had Ghana couldn't come but sent representatives, but they hardly really said anything remarkable. But the issue of Vietnam came up many, many times. And in the political committee proceedings, we have statements from Vietnamese representatives, especially the state of Vietnam. But these are all about their own situation, not about international relations or a general world order. So which is why I didn't pay too much. I mean, I know what's in there, but I didn't really highlight them.
Because the French had just been thrown out.
Sorry?
The French had just been thrown out of...
Yeah. So in a sense, Bandung would not have happened without that. Because when the French were defeated in Dien Bien Phu, and the Americans decided to move into China in a big way, that's what got the 5 prime ministers to say that Cold War is coming to our doorstep. Let's organize Colombo Conference and Colombo Powers, and then have Bandung. So that was really the spark. And India was very much involved in the Geneva talks. And as you know, the Geneva talks also was part of the Cold War, where Dulles refused to shake hands with Zhou Enlai. So when President Nixon went to China in '72, the first thing he did, coming out of plane, his hands were stretched to meet Zhou Enlai. I did to make up for that. And you can see that Neil Ferguson, a friend of mine, the big historian, written a book and he's writing 3 books on Kissinger, and he has this picture, and he says Kissinger interviewed Kissinger, and told Nixon that you make raise your hand and correct that error, because Dulles refused to shake Zhou Enlai's hand. So there are a lot of dramas that are happening, and Vietnam, certainly the war, the escalation of the war in Vietnam with American direct participation, which meant the United States did not care as much about decolonization, more about anti-communism. And the British took advantage of that and said, if you forget colonialism, we will actually sabotage the Bandung for you, and therefore we would have both will be winners. We arrest colonialism and you arrest communism. So that's what the basis of the Anglo-American conspiracy, which actually was a conspiracy. There's no other way to describe it.
Okay, let's thank Amitav for his great talk. We have a small gift for you. Remember Cal State Long Beach. So you can put some of those secret documents in there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again. And thank you everybody for coming.